welcome Gail with her story, Smoothies and Sharks. Smoothies and Sharks.
Thank you very much. I am so excited to be here and just truly thank you for this opportunity. So by day, I'm an SEO and digital marketing, but by night and weekends and whenever I can steal away, I'm an adventurer with a travel and adventure podcast. And 2020 is a weird year for a travel podcast, let me tell you. But we get creative on the show. So I've got a story for you today called Smoothies and Sharks. So let's begin. I was 17 years old, sitting on a boat in the middle of the ocean with men I barely knew in shark-infested waters, thinking maybe this is why my mother was concerned. Now, I'm going to take you back to 6 months prior. I was living in Tennessee, and I was at the lowest of my lows. My parents and I had been in many court dates over multiple years with a very contentious divorce. Just a lot of crap was going on. I was in and out of multiple schools, and one day I decided just to take a bottle of Advil and just be done with it. And that put me into the Vanderbilt Psychiatric Hospital, and that was an interesting change. And one day I was allowed to go to the hospital part-time, and I could drive myself. The state of Tennessee ended up getting me a hardship license too during this period. And I was driving the 45-minute drive back to my home, and I saw this Smoothie King in Nashville, and I decided, okay, I'll just stop in. And I was still just feeling just so low, like there's just no purpose, life sucks. And I walked into the Smoothie King, and all the employees were wearing these Hawaiian shirts, and they say, "Aloha, welcome to Smoothie King." And I'm like, whoa, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say aloha before. This is so cool. So I order a Caribbean way, and I'm like watching these workers, and they're like pouring the strawberries and doing the bananas, and they got like a little jazz in their step, and they're smiling, and they got like high ponytails, and I'm like, this is what happiness looks like. I found it. Like, happiness is at Smoothie King. And I'm like, okay, I need to learn how to become happy, so clearly I need to work at Smoothie King. And so I paid for my smoothie and asked for an application, and I filled it out. I didn't care, like it was almost an hour away from where I lived. I just found the youth of happiness. So I got this job at Smoothie King. I mean, it's like $6 an hour or something. And I probably spent more in gas than what I earned there. But I like learned the Smoothie Happiness way. You know, I got that pep in the step. I would peel bananas to tropical music, and I started saying aloha to people, and I wore the Hawaiian shirt with pride. And one day the owner of Smoothie King came to me, and he knew I had been in like a weird situation for quite some time. And my family didn't have any money. It was all taken away in all these like court dates. And I'm really trying to do my part for the family too. And he looked at me and he's just like, what do you want to do with your life? And I'm thinking, well, I'm breaking the Smoothie King, you know, but I thought about it, and I went to like that happy place in my head. You know, I went to that place like when I was like 5 and 6 and 7 to like what I thought happiness would be. And I looked at him and I said, John, I want to be on the bottom of the ocean surrounded by sharks. And he's like, okay, all right. I can take that. I can dig it, you know? And so I kept on doing my work and I wanted to pick up more hours after school, weekends. I needed to work. I needed some money. And I asked him for more hours and he said he would give them to me. And he said if I could do all these hours and make straight A's in school, he would do something really cool for me. So I'm like, cool. So I went to class, you know, got my grades up, started making straight A's. You know, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what is it going to be? Is it going to be a Starbucks gift card? Is it going to be, you know, movie tickets? Is it going to be a $20 bonus? I mean, I don't know. So I ended up doing it. I gave him my straight A's. I'm freaking excited. He pats me on the back and doesn't mention anything. So each week I'm like checking my folder to see like what is like, do I have like a $20 bonus in here? Is, you know, where's the Starbucks gift card? Like, what is this special thing going to be? And like weeks went by. And one night while I was driving home, he called me and he never called me. And so I picked up, I know while driving, don't do that. And so I'm talking to him and he said, Gail, I need to speak to your mother. And I'm like, oh no, he overheard that I snuck out the other night. He's gonna tell her everything. Don't talk to my mom, whatever you do. And I'm like, oh John, whatever you need to tell my mother, you can just tell it straight to me. I promise I will tell her every word. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, wow, he's okay, cool. And he said, Gail, I want to get you scuba certified. You worked hard. I know you want to be with the sharks. Thing is, you can't do it during working hours. So I've set you up with a private instructor starting at 10 o'clock at night in Nashville. So you can get your certification. I'm like, hell yeah! Yes, I'm so in. My mother will be fine with it. Don't worry. And so I started these diving lessons. And before I knew it, I had this open water certification and I was hanging out at the dive shop one day and I saw this orange flyer with like sharks all over it. And it was written in like scary letters and it said like swim with the sand tiger sharks in the graveyard of the Atlantic. Called that because there's like all these like shipwrecks there and there's German U-boat and I'm like, yeah, I'm going on this trip. And it said I need to be advanced and nitrox certified. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'll go get that. And so I called up the same scuba instructor. I start doing these extra lessons, paying him with every single Smoothie King dollar I've ever earned. And I just didn't want to ask anything of my mom already. Like we just did not have cash for this. And each week I would go to the dive shop and I would give them $10 here, $20 there. I went to the bank and got a debit card with the Visa logo on it. And I called the airline and I ended up buying tickets to go to North Carolina to go swim with these sharks. And then I found the other men that had signed up for this trip and they're all like middle-aged men. And I'm this like teenager and I just turned 17 and I am now, you know, trying to figure this out. So I ended up paying for the trip, got these extra certifications. I figured I'd, you know, figure it out. I never dove in an ocean before. I just did rock quarry dives in Tennessee, but it'd be all right. And then I couldn't afford a hotel, nor could I book a hotel. So I asked the men if I could sleep like at their hotel. And they're like, yeah, it's fine. And rented a car with them. And I just was so afraid to tell my mom. I didn't want her to say no. So I wanted to book everything, pay for everything. But I just still couldn't tell her. But it was a week before I was leaving. And I'm like, I need to let her know I'm leaving town. And so she came home from work. And as she walked in, I'm like, hey, I got to show you something. And I like laid out all these diving certifications and the trip itinerary and where I was going, and she flipped out. She drove straight down to the dive shop. She sat the owner down and she like reamed him out for letting me sign up for this trip without her permission. And then she looked him in the eye and she said, do you promise to treat her like your own daughter? And he said, I promise. And she came home and said, I could go. So before I knew it, I was on an airplane. I flew to North Carolina. I landed. I'm surrounded by these middle-aged men. And then they cracked open some beers. They handed it to me and they said, "You're one of the guys." And I'm like, cool, great. Don't treat me like your daughter. Like I'm one of you now. And before I knew it, I was out on this boat multiple hours away from the coast, and I got to do my first dive. We went down to 120 feet, and I'm at the base of the shipwreck, and I am now on the ocean floor surrounded by sharks. And it was the most exciting moment. I'm like, this. I mean, I thought smoothies were happiness, but like sitting on the bottom of the ocean surrounded by sharks, now this is happiness. And I'm freaking out and I'm laughing and I'm like got a regulator in, so it's like blah 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 blah, and I'm freaking out underwater because I'm so excited. But I was running through my air like no other, and I'm like, okay, I should probably like head back to the rope, And so you have to go up really slowly. You can't just like shoot to the surface, and you've got to do these safety stops. You've got to get the nitrogen bubbles out of your system. And while I'm doing my safety stops on this line, I'm taking these breaths in, and then I couldn't take another breath. Like I ran out of air. And that's bad, like that's like not what you want to do underwater. And so I looked down and I saw some of the men below me, and I was able to pull myself on the rope down, and I'm like trying to hit them underwater, which is a hard thing to do. And then they turned around and I'm like, I'm out of air. I need to buddy breathe. And they're like, really? Like, I'm like, yeah. So I took my regulator out. They put their spare regulator in me, and we came up to the surface together very slowly and got on the boat. And there, feeling the sun on my face and tasting the salt, I realized that I had found happiness in shark-infested waters with men that were now my friends.